Venezuela's first republic was not a nation. It was a fever dream, a sunstruck hallucination hurriedly conjured by Creole lawyers and poets drunk on Rousseau, believing they could summon Philadelphia under the Caribbean sun. They drafted constitutions like love letters to liberty, while the earthquake swallowed their homes and royalist bayonets gleamed menacingly in the hills. And yet, for a brief, gloriously fragile moment, they had it. Before Bolívar, before the sword ruled the land, we were a republic. We were free. And then, like everything in Venezuela, we lost it spectacularly. This is the story of that brief shining madness, the lost republic, and how we've been bitterly wandering through the wreckage ever since. The year is 1810. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican upstart turned emperor, has dethroned King Ferdinand VII of Spain, placing his own brother, Joseph, awkwardly on the Spanish throne. Across the Atlantic, this news arrives in Caracas like a gunshot at a dinner party. The colonial elite, landowners and merchants, whose wealth rests on cacao, coffee, and human bondage, gather nervously in salons, sipping chocolate, clutching their silver spoons as though they might ward off the specters of revolution. Among them are names that will echo through Venezuelan history. Juan Germán Rosillo, the mulatto lawyer whose pen will become his sword. Martín Tovar Ponte, the aristocrat flirting with rebellion, and a young, ambitious Simón Bolívar. Not yet the liberator, but a restless son of privilege, watching history's wheel turn with equal parts dread and desire. The world outside is trembling. In Paris, the guillotine's blade has rusted, but the memory still gleams in the minds of monarchs. Across the Atlantic, the United States, an improbable republic born from musket fire and Jeffersonian prose, stand as proof that subjects can become citizens. And now Spain, the once mighty empire, is a wounded beast bleeding across Europe. In Caracas, the local Captain General Vicente Emparan clings to royal authority like a man clutching to driftwood in a storm. He is the king's representative, the embodiment of Spanish rule in this corner of the empire, tasked with keeping the colony loyal and the cacao shipments flowing. But on April 19, 1810, the tides turn. The city simmers under the Caribbean sun. Emparan, on his way to the cathedral for the day services, finds his path blocked. A restless crowd gathers, murmuring, eyes fixed on him. The city council members, figures of authority in great coats, approach him not with reverence, but with purpose. They do not let him pass. Instead, they guide him across the plaza to the Cabildo, the colonial seat of government, where the true confrontation unfolds. Inside the dimly lit chamber, the air is thick with heat and whispers. The Creole elite gather, descendants of Spaniards born on Venezuelan soil, wealthy and educated, yet always second-class citizens in the eyes of Madrid. The tension is suffocating. The light sparse, only a few golden beams pierce through the high windows, illuminating dust swirlings in the air. This is not a meeting, it is a reckoning. Juan Germán Rosillo stands among them, a mulatto lawyer brilliant and uncompromising who has long navigated the racial hierarchies of the colony. His pen will soon help draft Venezuela's Declaration of Independence, but on this day, it is his voice that rises above the murmurs. No somos súbditos, somos ciudadanos. We are not subjects, we are citizens. The words hang in the humid air like a thunderclap. Emparan, sensing the weight of history pressing against him, steps towards the balcony. He turns to the crowd outside, asking if they wish him to remain in power. Before they can respond, a Creole leader signals them to shout, "No." Emparan sees the walls of royal power closing in. He nods and resigns. The Junta Suprema is born. Not a band of guerrillas, but powdered wigs and legal minds, men steeped in Montesquieu and Locke, hoping to script Venezuela into modernity. They speak of liberty, equality, and sovereignty, though their vision of freedom is still confined to the drawing rooms of the Creole elite. July 5th of 1811 stands as a date that should be carved into the collective consciousness of Venezuelans with the same reverence as July 4th is in the United States. In a sunlit hall in Caracas, these men sweating under white linen, ink smudging on parchment, declare Venezuela's independence, the second in the Americas to do so after the United States and Haiti. The vision was lofty, separation of powers, a republic governed by reason and law, where liberty and equality would flourish. The constitution drafted by the Junta Suprema echoed the ideals of enlightenment. Montesquieu's checks and balances and Rousseau's social contracts, the dream that men could govern themselves without a king. On parchment, it was beautiful, words etched with the conviction that Venezuela could be the Athens of South America. But the reality was far less noble. The republic was a republic for the few. The Creole elite, the landowners who had driven Emparan out, retained their grip on power. The pardos, the mixed-race majority, the artisans, the workers, the freed slaves, were excluded from this new political order. Liberty was declared from balconies, but below the crowd saw the same faces holding the reins. The enslaved whose labor powered the cacao and coffee plantations watched their masters toast to freedom, knowing it did not extend to their chains. Further from Caracas, across the vastness of Venezuela's wild geography, the Republican vision grew faint. The llaneros, the horsemen of the plains, saw little reason to fight for Creole gentlemen in powdered wigs. They were fiercely independent, their loyalty tied not to constitutions, but to the rivers and the grasslands they roamed. The Republic's promises fell as distant as the city. Geography itself was the Republic's adversary. This was not Boston or Philadelphia, where colonies were strung along a manageable coastline. Venezuela was a land of extremes, the towering Andes, dense jungles, and endless llanos. Communication was slow, powers were local. Caracas might declare liberty, but in the mountains of Mérida or the plains of Apure, men answered to the nearest strongman, not to paper decrees from the capital. The year 1812 should have been the moment the new republic solidified its footing, proving that liberty could take root in Venezuelan soil. Instead, it was the beginning of its undoing. The fragile unity of the First Republic, stitched together by idealism and parchment, was about to be shredded by forces far beyond their control. Forces both earthly and divine. On March 26, 1812, the ground shook. A devastating earthquake, one of the deadliest in Venezuelan history, struck Caracas and other Republican strongholds, reducing the capital to rubble. Churches crumbled, entire districts vanished under the weight of fallen stone, and thousands lay buried beneath the debris. But the physical destruction was only the beginning of the catastrophe. The psychological and political impact was even greater. The royalists, never missing an opportunity to turn disaster into propaganda, declared the earthquake God's punishment for Republican blasphemy. Their argument was terrifyingly persuasive. The cities most devastated were those that had rebelled against the king. In the minds of many, this was divine retribution, a celestial verdict against the Republic. As survivors dug through the ruins of Caracas, an even more dangerous storm was brewing to the west. Domingo de Monteverde, a Spanish officer stationed in Coro, saw an opportunity. With a small force, he launched a counteroffensive, capitalizing on the chaos that now gripped the Republican leadership. Monteverde was not a grand strategist, but he didn't have to be. The Republic was already rotting from within. With the church backing his cause and the common people disillusioned by the earthquake's supposed divine warning, Monteverde's advance was swift and devastating. Republican defenses crumbled under betrayal and paranoia. Many pardos and llaneros, sensing that the Republic was nothing more than a reshuffled aristocracy that excluded them, defected to the royalists. Others saw the writing on the wall and chose survival over ideology. As Monteverde's forces closed in, the Republic's leaders either fled or turned on each other. The elegant theories of Montesquieu and Rousseau had no answer for the brute force of war, famine, and religious fear. By July 1812, Monteverde entered Caracas as a victorious enforcer of the Spanish crown. There was no last stand, no heroic battle, only confusion, betrayal, and panic. Creole families packed their belongings and disappeared into exile, while Spanish soldiers strolled through the ruined capital, picking their teeth and counting their spoils. The First Republic, the dream of an orderly, enlightened Venezuela, was dead, and in its place, the seeds of a much bloodier revolution were being sown. Simón Bolívar emerged from the ruins of the First Republic not as a philosopher-statesman, but as a soldier. The dream of a republic governed by laws had collapsed in the rubble of Caracas, crushed under royalist bayonets and swallowed by the superstition that had turned an earthquake into a divine reckoning. If Venezuela was to be free, it would not be through parchment and quills, but through musket and blood. Bolívar was not yet the liberator, not yet the figure who would come to embody South American independence. He was a man in exile, haunted by the failure of his class. The Creoles had proven weak, indecisive, obsessed with theory, while Monteverde's soldiers marched in reality. The Republic had fallen because its leaders had tried to reason with history instead of seizing it by the throat. In 1813, Bolívar launched the Admirable Campaign, a stunning counteroffensive that saw him and his forces sweep across Venezuela in a rapid series of victories. His return was messianic, his rhetoric was fiery. Where the First Republic had hesitated, he did not. He issued the decree of war to the death, a chilling proclamation. Any Spaniard who did not actively support independence would be executed. Bolívar had no patience for half measures, but the republic he sought to rebuild was no longer the delicate, law-bound vision of 1811. This was not a government emerging from debate, but from conquest. The sword had replaced the quill. Bolívar understood what his predecessors had not. A state is not declared into existence, it is forged in war. A war demanded centralization, discipline, and absolute power. By the time he reclaimed Caracas in August 1813, he was no longer just a leader. He was a military autocrat in the making. The civil republic the Junta Suprema had imagined with its Montesquieuan balance of powers was already a relic. Bolívar wielded command as both general and statesman. The dream of liberty had survived, but it was now dressed in a military uniform. The seeds of future turmoil had taken root. To vanquish Spain, Bolívar had to summon an army not just greater but unchallengeable, an entity unto itself, bound only by the will of its creator. And when the enemy lay broken, what then? A republic or a military state? The collapse of the First Republic did not just simply mark the end of an experiment. It set a precedent, a ghostly blueprint that would be followed time and time again in Venezuelan history. The nation would rise, would reach for democracy, and then, inevitably, power would concentrate. The dream would be crushed, and the cycle would begin anew. For over 2 centuries, this pattern has repeated itself like some unbroken Amazonian curse. The idealists draft their constitutions, the strongmen seize the reign, and the people, always the people, find themselves caught in the middle. From the Cabildo of the 19th century, who ruled with an iron hand over a fragmented land, to the oil-fueled authoritarianisms of the 20th century, to the democratic openings that flickered before being stamped out once more, the specter of the lost republic has never faded. Venezuelans have never lacked the dream. It has been written, spoken, fought for, and died for, but too often it has been strangled in its infancy. Whether by foreign intervention, internal strife, or the ambitions of those who claim to save the country by ruling it absolutely. Each attempt to democracy has carried the weight of 1812, as if the republic was always doomed to drown in blood and mud. Today, the echoes of that first failure are impossible to ignore. The same debates, the same struggles, the same longing for a republic that can stand, not just for a moment, but for generations. The question remains, can Venezuela ever escape the cycle, or are we destined to repeat it until history itself runs out of patience?